Jacob
You
Burton
just
here
like
from
his
the
word,
Stella
follow here.
Culinary School
I think
podcast, found
actually
online
here.
at Stella
Really?
Culinary.com.
I'm not very sure.
And in today's video,
right
we're
now,
going to discuss
either.
how to garnish food and sort of take
I know
an
you're. No, that's
overview
okay. We
of
don't
the
talk.
concept of
You got
adding
to the right
garnishes
place
to
here.
any given
Sorry
plate
for
or
that.
dish.
I
And
think
this
Brian
video was
sister
actually
here,
inspired by a
You
question that I received
Wow,
on our
it's
latest
so
video,
good.
which was our
I thank
composed
you.
cauliflower
It's not
soup
an
video.
easy.
And
Hey,
user
my friend here. What's that?
NVJ944
Stop right now!
asks,
You're
when
not
doing this
correct.
pour-in presentation, what's the trick to the garnishes? Are there some that work better than others? Also, the sliced cauliflower doesn't float, right? So you need to use a wide, shallow bowl, otherwise the soup would cover up your beautiful presentation. One thing to
Stop
this is that
Come on, don't touch
in regards to cauliflower soup, and more importantly, covering up the garnishes. So the whole cauliflower soup is the fact that no matter what you do, at some point that composition is going to be ruined by pouring the soup over the top of the garnishes. So part of the drama in serving a composed soup is plating your garnishes and plating your other dry ingredients into the bowl, presenting that bowl to the guest, and then pouring the soup over those garnishes, tableside in front of the guests, and adds a bit of a dramatic appeal to the dish and to the presentation of the dish. But when choosing garnishes in general, and this is what this video is meant to focus on, is when creating a dish and you're thinking about choosing garnishes, you need to you might be asking yourself, well, how do I go about choosing a garnishes, and what garnishes are appropriate? So there is a simple starting point where you must always start out, and that is asking yourself one question. What is the primary focus of your dish? So in the case of the cauliflower soup, well, yeah, the cauliflower soup is the primary focus. The cauliflower puree that we made is the primary focus. When people order this off of my menu, they're ordering cauliflower soup. So it doesn't really matter what sort of other food garnishes I put on the plate or what cool techniques I use to serve it. If the cauliflower soup base isn't highlighted and showcased, then the person who orders it is going to be disappointed because they ordered cauliflower soup and that's what they wanted. So to highlight this primary ingredient, you then need to ask yourself, well, how can I enhance my primary ingredient? And there's two ways to enhance your primary ingredient, and both are important in a completed presented dish. The first is complementary flavors. And so in this example, the complementary flavors I chose to enhance my primary ingredient, being my cauliflower soup base, was a seared cauliflower, some basil in the form of basil oil, togarashi, which is a Japanese 7-spice, mosh, which is also commonly known as lamb's lettuce. It's a nice, fresh, tender green, and snapdragon petals. Now, the other approach that you need to think about or take into consideration is also contrasting textures. And contrasting textures are extremely important. So you want to make sure that your dish has a mixture of textures like smooth, brittle, crunchy, chewy, meaty. Because take the example again of the cauliflower soup puree. Now, if made properly and strained and seasoned and all that good stuff, the first couple of sips are going to be fantastic. You know, oh, this is really good. But when you're eating a portion of it, when you're eating a bowl full of cauliflower soup, after the first couple of spoonfuls, you're going to get bored with it. You're going to have palate fatigue. That's because that puree becomes extremely one-dimensional over time because it has no contrasting elements, no contrasting flavors, and more importantly, no contrasting textures. So after the first couple of bites, it's just going to be smooth soup after smooth soup after smooth soup. And it's going to get real boring, right? So you enhance this by choosing garnishes that are both complementary in flavor and also add a nice textural element to the dish. So how do you actually choose complementary flavors? Well, besides just experience and trial and error, a really good resource that I enjoy for inspiration is the Flavor Bible. And you basically look up an ingredient, it's alphabetized, and then it will list other ingredients that go good with that ingredient. So in this case, I would actually look up in the Flavor Bible cauliflower, and I would have a list of ingredients to choose from. And so it's a helpful resource when you have a little bit of writer's block when coming up with a new dish. So let's go through our garnishes and talk about them one by one and why I chose to use them for this dish in hopes that it'll give you a little bit of a broader perspective of how you would choose a garnish for any given dish that you would create. So first we have basil, and basil and cauliflower are a very classic flavor pairing, and I chose to apply the flavor of the basil in the sense of an oil because I think the oil has a nice color to it, it has a nice dramatic appeal, and it allows me to add the basil flavor without necessarily the texture of chopped basil, which will start to float around your soup, or a whole basil leaf, which is just going to wilt and turn brown. So the application of the basil oil helps me to serve up a very different form. Now also it's going to add a little bit of to the dish, but there's no contrasting texture. It's not like basil oil is going to contrast nicely with a pureed soup. So I'm definitely going to need some other textural elements. I can't just garnish the soup with basil oil and call the dish complete. But the green color contrast does contrast nicely with the whiteness of the cauliflower soup puree. So it does add a nice visual element as well as a decent flavor structure. Now the second element is the seared cauliflower, and I like this because roasted cauliflower has an amazing flavor and aroma to it, but also too you're taking that primary ingredient and you're serving it in a different form as a contrasting texture, so it helps to give a little bit more depth of flavor. The whole point behind the soup is to highlight the cauliflower, right, and the cauliflower puree. So serving a piece of cauliflower in a different form and allowing it to contrast texturally and also visually and flavor-wise is going to just give more like a cauliflower depth to the overall dish itself. And the caramelized cauliflower has a nice sort of a chewy, almost meatiness to it, and so this is going again to add a nice textural element, textural contrast to the puree. Now we also have our mosh, which is commonly known as lamb's lettuce. It's a tender green, available in the early spring into summertime. And it adds a nice sort of freshness to the dish, and also a slight textural crunch. And I like serving it raw like this because what happens is when you pour the hot soup over the mosh, it's going to wilt slightly, but it's not going to lose its texture, and it's not going to lose its fresh flavor, versus if you actually threw a handful of this into the soup while you were boiling it or reheating it, it's going to completely wilt and lose its fresh flavor and fresh texture. So this allows you to serve the cauliflower soup with a nice fresh contrast without it being completely wilted and cooked out. Now also we have the togarashi, which is a Japanese 7-spice, which has a really complex flavor to it and has a nice little kick to it as well. And when you take into consideration how fat will coat your palate, and there's a decent amount of fat in the actual cauliflower puree itself, both with the butter that we use to mount it. There's also a little bit of cream in the puree, a little bit of butter, and what happens is fat will add a nice richness of flavor and richness of mouthfeel to any given dish, but it will also coat the palate and deaden other flavors. Now one of the good ways to cut through that, besides adding a couple of drops of acid, whether it's lemon juice or any sort of vinegar of your choice, is a little heat, a little bit of a kick. And so here I sprinkle on just enough togarashi, not to necessarily make the soup spicy, but to add enough back hint of heat to help cut through the inherent richness of the fat that's contained within the cauliflower puree. Now, the final element is the snapdragon, which is just a purple flower pearl that we have here. And besides the colorful contrast that it adds to other garnishes, it adds a nice complexity of flavor and a floral element. And having a nice little floral note with some dishes, especially dishes that are vegetable-based, can really add an amazing complexity of aroma and taste to a dish. But also, it's very easy to overdo it. So you'll notice I only add 3 small little petals because I want little pockets of flavor throughout the dish. I don't want every single bite to contain a flower petal. I don't want every single bite to contain a piece of mosh. That'd become overbearing. So what I do is I add these in a little random order and try and add them in small elements to where they have little pockets of flavor. And you'll also notice that I played it in threes. So there's three little components on the plate. And a little trick for plating is odds are always going to be more beautiful than even. So you want to plate in ones, threes, fives, not necessarily twos or fours. Now, when choosing a garnish, there are three rules to garnishing food that you always want to follow. Number one is garnishes should always be functional.
What's going on up
If
there?
you can't eat it, it doesn't belong on the plate. Now, there are a few exceptions to things like skewers and specialty utensils that serve a purpose, but for the most part, if your garnish isn't edible, it doesn't belong on the plate. Number two is garnishes should always enhance the primary ingredient. It doesn't matter what cool technique I'm using or what cool ingredient I have. If the garnish doesn't enhance the flavor of your primary ingredient, then it doesn't belong on the plate. Now, number three, garnishes should always add contrasting colors and textures and overall interest in the plate to the plate. And if you many share the same color tone, then your plate will look flat. Also our video on how to make basil oil, and then watch the video that was the precursor to this one on composed cauliflower soup, which actually takes you through and shows you how to plate our cauliflower soup. And as always, you can subscribe to Stella on YouTube to make sure that you never miss any of our free educational videos.
I am first, seventh, and fifth. For everyone, children. I fought you, children.